And there, that's leading us right into Steve, right on cue. So Steve, I'll go ahead and start doing your introduction while you get settled there. So Steve Lange is a digital and app innovation specialist focusing primarily in life sciences. His role helps customers realize the full potential of Azure with cloud native approaches, culture, and services. This includes modernizing applications, event-driven applications, serverless, and API economies. He also works a lot with organizations looking to improve their developer productivity through DevSecOps practices and tooling. He's been at Microsoft over 17 years and lives in Colorado. And it looks like, Steve, you're off mute and I can see your presentation. So go ahead, take it away, my friend.
Awesome. So you can hear me, Matt?
Yeah.
All right, great. Great. Thank you, everybody, for making it this far in your day. Really do appreciate the time you've put in, the investment you've put in to hopefully pick up some great nuggets of information today. So I will hope to follow Heather's great presentation with another good one, hopefully on GitHub Copilot. If you don't mind, before I jump into it real quickly, just by a quick, again, show of virtual reactions, hearts, thumbs up, whatever it might be. I'd love to see how many people have actually used or are currently using GitHub Copilot today. So if you don't mind, just kind of throw those up there. All right. See a few, pretty great. Awesome. So for those of you that have not played with it before, then this will be a very beneficial session. In this session, we're going to pivot just a little bit from looking at how AI can benefit external customers and take a look at how it can be leveraged to help teams actually build those compelling intelligent applications that Heather was talking about in the previous session. So specifically for developers, I can actually get my slides to move, GitHub Copilot. Think of GitHub Copilot as your AI peer programmer focusing on giving your developers these three big advantages. One, around increasing developer productivity. This helps developers to get a greater sense of overall satisfaction with their jobs by helping provide suggestions and take care of repetitive code and boilerplate code, allowing them to cut down on the development time of that kind of plumbing type code and spend a lot more time on the more meaningful work in their days, such as actually solving a business problem, or in the world of healthcare, solving a patient's problem or solving a doctor's problem. It generally leads to overall increase in productivity, but also just a greater sense of job satisfaction. It also helps with things around speeding up the rate of innovation which your organization can do, such as allowing them to test drive new ideas faster, try new things sooner. As a result, companies that adopt these latest technologies, you can also then attract new talent by giving them what the cool kids want, giving them the best-in-class tools as they seek to modernize their development processes. And lastly, we're finding a lot of organizations, as they leverage GitHub Copilot, are using it to help bridge skill gaps as well. If you have an application that is using a niche programming language like COBOL or whatnot, GitHub Copilot can help an organization train developers to understand what they're looking at when they're going through that COBOL code or whatever type of legacy application language might be. Excuse me. So GitHub Copilot works in a way that it helps you offer suggestions, or helps offer suggestions to you that you can use in your project. Now, just as you've seen for any other announcement Microsoft's made around this heavily overloaded term Copilot, we stress that it is a Copilot and not an autopilot. So it's giving you, again, suggestions. It's not telling you, here's exactly the code you need. It's like, here's what we think you could use. What do you think? And it's up to you to accept that or not. So this allows you to, again, kind of quickly create that boilerplate code, autofill that repetitive code. Also, it'll give you multiple suggestions about what the best solution might be for your current ask, and let you kind of pick and choose from there. Again, apply what you want to leverage, throw away what you don't, and then tweak to meet your organization, your code base's needs. As a result of this, we did actually a survey last year, and I'll post a link to it in the chat after the session. We found that 96% of respondents to that survey, after using GitHub Copilot for just a few months, said they were faster with repetitive tasks. You see the other stats, 88% said they were way more productive in their work, and 74%, going back to that original increasing developer productivity and satisfaction type pillar, 74% say they were able to focus on more satisfying work in their job, leading to greater job satisfaction overall. So let's keep moving through here because I do want to make sure we have plenty of time for me to show you some demos as well. But this is sort of a quick boilerplate of how Copilot actually works. So really, here's what it specifically does. It lets you tell it what you want by describing logic and context, and tries to assemble the code for you. So what you see is you tell it, it goes off, talks to the OpenAI codex, comes back. Newer versions of Copilot, by the way, which are in the private preview today. You might have heard of Copilot X or heard of Copilot Chat that was announced at Build, is already using ChatGPT 4 and moving away from the codex, but this is leveraging this today. It compiles it, sends it back. What it also does right before it returns the suggestions to you, it also takes a look and filters out any PII or potentially sensitive language or hate or offensive speech. And so it hopefully delivers you, a clean set of suggestions for you to leverage in your application. But you simply just install the extension into your favorite code editor. You can see the ones that are listed on the screen. And once Copilot is enabled for your GitHub organization, it's just going to start working until you tell it not to. So we're going to take a look at what that looks like. Hopefully the slides were fast enough for everybody. All right. So let me pull up. I'm in Visual Studio Code. Hopefully you all can still see that screen.
Yep.
And I'm going to start off, which is a couple quick things here. I'm going to walk through showing how to create code from comments, or providing it some basic English logic and generating code from that. How to do autofill of existing code or code you're typing in. How to show alternative solutions or suggestions. We're going to go across several different languages today, several of which I don't know very well. And then if there's time, there's a few things that are appearing or will be appearing in Copilot X, therefore the next release of Copilot, which are currently in private preview. I don't have access to that today, unfortunately, to show you, but we do have another extension called Copilot Labs, which houses a few of those features, and I'll be happy to pull those up as well. So let's jump in. So again, if you're not familiar with Visual Studio Code, I've currently got a file open here. I've got my browser on the left side. I've got search, and I've got Copilot Labs, which we'll jump to at the end. Anytime you have Copilot enabled, this will be in code. You'll see down in your status bar in the bottom right, you'll see this little Copilot logo sitting there. And so as long as it's there and doesn't have a line through it, you have Copilot enabled and running for you. So let's start off here. The most popular programming language in the world is actually profanity. Copilot's filters, as I mentioned, will keep me from using that language today. So let's go ahead and start off with JavaScript. Now, I don't need to type this all in for Visual Studio Code to know, but thought I'd just do that for everyone to see what I'm going to do. The first thing I want to do is, let's say I need to tap into an API to maybe send some emails. So maybe I want to use the SendGrid API, a very popular messaging API, to send emails. But I've never used that before, so I'm not really quite sure how to do it. So I'm going to just, in a code comment, I'm just going to say, actually, a little snippet here. I'm going to define a function to send email notifications using the SendGrid API. And all I'm going to do is hit enter. And now it says, okay, I think I understand what you want me to do. I'm going to have you send an email notification. There's defining the function. And it's going to start figuring out some additional set of code for me to do. And I'm just going to keep going. And maybe, again, this is a Copilot, not autopilot. So maybe this isn't perfect, but it's a heck of a lot closer than what I would have had before. And so now I can go through to inspect this as well. And so now it's already thinking, well, maybe you also want to know how to send it via the Twilio API. So I could even kind of just tab through that and see what it finds for me there. By the way, the most fun part about demonstrating with GitHub Copilot is the fact that it is an OpenAI or a probabilistic API, not deterministic. So I never exactly know what I'm going to get. But so far, this stuff looks pretty good. So it's a quick and easy example of asking it to do something using maybe an API that you don't fully understand. Now, there's a couple other things as well too. If you want to see how you're doing with code completion. Let's say I'm working on a function to calculate the days between dates. So you might have typed in that code, not as a comment, but typed in the definition of that function, and it's already coming up with a couple options for me here. So this is nice, showing me that I think I know what you want to do. Now, what I could also do is as it provides these suggestions, if I hit Control Enter, you'll see it opens up another window for me on the right. And what it does is now it's being told like, hey, Steve wants to know a little bit more. Give me some more options for what I could do here. So it's cranking away, might take a few seconds or so. And then it'll come back with potentially 10 suggestions for what I can do. And see, it found one duplicate, so I've got 9 suggestions. So I can look through these different suggestions, see what seems most applicable, either for me to understand or for for based upon a coding practice or a coding standard that we might have in my organization, and I can just pick one. I'm not going to spend the time thinking through each one, but I'm just going to accept one, and it throws it in there. Again, I can cycle through them all if I want to by doing that, or actually using another keystroke combination to cycle through them in line. So moving right along, let's do something else too. Let's switch languages, and now let's do another fun programming language. A popular one is Python. So in Python, maybe I want to do something like a binary search. So I ask it to say, hey, do a binary search. And it's even completing the comment for me by saying, hey, do you mean on a list or on something else? Please be more specific. I'm going to tell it, yeah, sure, I want to do it on a list. I'll let it go and provide some suggestions for me. It's going to keep kind of describing what it thinks the function is going to be. But if I enter, it'll kind of give me the next suggestion from there. So you see it's kind of just spelling out what it thinks it wants to do. And when it's done with that, hopefully it comes back to me later, maybe not. It will give me sort of that result there too. So if I just kind of tell it maybe not on a list, but just do binary search. Now it's defining what a binary search will do for me here. So now it's still thinking, it'll come back and it'll give me what it thinks would be a good binary search. So as you can see, we're crossing multiple languages. We pretty much support any language that is basically out in the public world, such as GitHub, and it'll note from there. So therefore, obviously, the more popular programming languages like Python, like JavaScript, like pick your popular language, it will be a little bit more accurate. It'll have a little bit more context to work off of, a little more background to work off of. But even more obscure languages that are out there, if there's a repo or 2 or 3 out on GitHub, it'll understand them and be able to at least give you some basic suggestions. Now, just as a quick example, I also want to show something that doesn't actually have anything to do with application code. This is not, like I mentioned, anything that's out in GitHub, any kind of language, which means declarative languages, which also means things like infrastructure as code. So let's do a Terraform file here. And I'm going to use Terraform to tell, you know what, I want you to define an Azure Windows VM. And again, it's trying to complete the whole sentence for me too, with a public IP address and a NIC, with a private IP address. I don't need to be that specific yet. So I'm just going to hit sure, go ahead and find me one. And think it's going to step me through this, or it's going to come back and I'm going to have a fully baked Terraform file that's ready to go and deliver. Now you can see a lot of this stuff is hard coded in there. So I would need to go and prioritize this and put in, where I'm going and what environment I'm pushing to, location, size, all that kind of stuff. But this is all that kind of boilerplate stuff that I was mentioning in the beginning that not a lot of developers, or in this case, IT professionals, really like to do. Like, I don't like to go research, what the syntax is for a Terraform file to define an Azure virtual VM, virtual machine. I would rather just to be able to fill in the blanks and move on to the next thing. So this has done a great job of enabling me to move on to that more important thing, which is, what am I going to deploy this machine? What am I going to do with it, etc. So last thing I want to take a look at, since we're doing good on time, I think we'll have time for some Copilot Labs too. Now, if we go ahead and open up, let's see here, this guy. So if I go to this, oops, let me open up my store proxy file actually. Close the other guys out here. So I've got this other application here, which is basically looking through a store, pulling information about a pet store inventory, pulling order information, and sending it back. And you see I've got a partially built file here for this class called store proxy. I've got a task that says get order. So you can see I've gotten to the part where I've called the REST API. and I want to make sure I check to make sure the response was proper. And so it's already thinks it knows what it wants me to do. But if I do sort of this as well, it's basically the same thing. Handle the case where the response is not HTTP OK. If I move on to the next line, it's saying, hey, if this is good, is success status code. That seems a little bit off. But if I go and look at that format of this, I can see that maybe this isn't right, so I can do something like that or whatever it might be. But if I see that maybe this isn't the right type of standard that our organization, or at least our team, is applying to in terms of checking for a proper response code, maybe what I need to be doing is giving GitHub Copilot a little bit more context as to what we're doing. So again, I didn't need that extra file open. So when you have other files open, that's also providing context for the for a Copilot in terms of what you're trying to do. Oftentimes, when you type in a suggestion or type in some code, it's going to look at the surrounding characters around that code to to help with additional context, but also make sure it's not returning an exact match of public code if you don't want it to. But also having these extra files open will give it the additional context of telling it, like, here's the types of standards, here's the formatting I like to do, etc. So now if I do this, CS, hopefully it's actually a little better. So handle the case for responses not HTTP OK. Now you see what I get is here's how it's handled. So if the status code is not OK, then I'm sending an error message saying bad news, there's an error timed with the order, etc. And if I go back and look at store proxy, or excuse me, pet proxy, that's the exact thing that was over here. So it's understanding the additional context of additionally open files to know that, hey, this is the type of style of approach and formatting that we want to apply when I'm providing a suggestion back to the end user. So a couple more things, and we'll see how much time we have for questions. So those are like the main things you can do. As you can imagine, you can do all different types of things with GitHub Copilot. When we were doing this this event in person a few weeks ago, there were so many people that just wanted to know, or wanted to share their experiences with it about, hey, I've been using this obscure language for the longest time, and it's helped me really ramp up others on learning that language. Again, I love not having to do all the plumbing code or as much of the plumbing code just to get my application running. I love being able to focus more on business logic. I love being able to learn new best practices rather than spend my time searching like Stack Overflow or just Googling or bringing different types of questions to see if I can get code snippets, put in my answers. Letting Copilot do that, keeping me in context of my IDE, in context of my project, letting me get my work done a lot more productively. So as I mentioned, we have this thing called Copilot Labs, and this is a free extension you can install. So if you have GitHub Copilot enabled, you can install this. And it kind of shows just like some future thinking things that the Copilot team is considering building into next versions of the product. And several of these things, if you watched Copilot chat be debuted at the Build conference, you'll see several of these things are baked into that. So this is sort of my poor man's way of showing you what those might look like. So I'm going to do a couple things. One is I'm going to open up, don't need that third file here. I'm going to open up this little JavaScript file. And I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to pretend that I've been getting an error in this code somewhere, and it's returning the wrong value, or it's giving me it's not doing exactly what I want it to do, and it's somewhere down in getting an item from the store. And if you are a developer, you've probably figured out what the problem is. So already, you can see right here, if I'm looking at this if-else check, it's saying, hey, if I did find this item, then tell me it's a 404. So that should be backwards. But let's just say I haven't quite looked through that. Maybe the code is a lot more complicated. What I can do is I can select the code. I'm going to go to Copilot Labs, and I'm going to tell it to open up the brushes here and select this and hit Fix Bug. And it's going to go off, take this as context, go off into Copilot and come back with what it thinks might be the right way of doing this code. And you see it did find that problem here. So now I've just fixed that simple little bug. And all this is being baked into, again, into Copilot chat. A couple of things to show. You can tell it to explain your code as well. So if I go into back into maybe brushes 1, and I'm like, Fibonacci, not too familiar with that. I don't need my extensions right now. So let's go here, select that, and say, hey, explain the code. And I'm going to open this up a little bit. And here it is. So I can tell, I'm going to tell it to explain the code one more time, just so you all can see it. So it's explained the code in a comment. So now it thinks this is what's happening with the code. If I like that, I now have my code comments already in my code. So I'm ready to move on to my next thing. So very helpful, speeds up a lot of things. Overall, really good, really productive for me. The last thing I'll show, then I'll wrap it up and see what questions we have. I'm going to do this last one here. One thing that people have been asking about and really started leveraging Copilot for is generating tests, specifically unit tests. And so just to give an example, that would be like, and again, that's something that was debuted in Copilot chat at build, is I can take that code. I'm going to go back to labs. Let's kind of give myself a bunch of real estate here. And I'm going to select my code. Shows there's a selected text. I'll say I have figured out what function you want me to talk about and suggest a new test for this. And what it's going to do, returns a test. You see now I've got a JavaScript test there. Let's go ahead and function, or it's going to do 3 different tests with 3 different assertions. And so now I've got a way of doing some test coverage for my, in this case, my JavaScript application. So a lot of great things you can do with Copilot. Now labs, if you want to see what's coming next, as well as Copilot chat. So I'm going to wrap up with just a couple other little slides here, then we'll see what questions we might have in the chat. GitHub Copilot comes in 2 flavors for individuals. Again, if you're just one or just a very small number of people wanting to work with GitHub Copilot, you can use GitHub Copilot for individuals. GitHub Copilot for business was released a few months ago, and gives you everything that was in Copilot for individuals, but additional checks and balances and controls in your organization. So by that, I mean, you can do things such as, let me go for it one more, allows you to control who has access to Copilot. So maybe you don't want your entire GitHub organization having access. You can pick and choose and control who does. You can tell it to filter out public code matches. So if you want to make sure that your code what code is returned to you is never an exact match with some public code, if you're worried about a copyright infringement or something like that. And then you can also, with GitHub Copilot for business, you will also be ensured that your code is ephemeral when it's sent off to get a suggestion back, which means as soon as the GitHub Copilot has taken your input, returned an output or a number of suggestions to you, your initial input is discarded, so it's never kept. So it's never going back into any other model to retrain a new model, especially a public model. So you don't have any kind of risk of accidentally interjecting some of your personally identifiable code or your IP into the public domain. So that said, I think I've got just a few minutes left. Matt, were there any questions in the chat that I can try to address?
Yeah, there were a few questions that came up in chat that were able to be answered in there, right, both with responses directly in line, as well as that last slide where you were bringing up the filtering public code matches was one of the specific questions that was asked there. There are a couple that had come in through the submission form. I think the first one's fairly straightforward. What languages does Copilot support?
Great question. And I touched upon it briefly when I started the demo. Copilot supports basically any language that there's a public repository for. So again, the more popular the language, by extension, the more repos there'll be for, say, a JavaScript or a Go or a Python-based repository. So the more, I'll call it more knowledgeable and therefore probably more accurate it will be. But any language that is out there that has any kind of repo has made it into the codex and can give you some insight.
Excellent. There's a question. Dinesh, I'm gonna expand your question a little bit. It's around which IDEs GitHub Copilot works with. They asked specifically about Eclipse, but if you could talk a little bit about the various IDEs.
Great. The main IDs are, of course, the main flavors of Visual Studio. So Visual Studio Pro and Enterprise, also VS Code, which I did the demo in. Any of the JetBrains IDEs, I put plural at the end of that because there are a lot of different permutations and flavors of JetBrains, but any of those IDs that are based upon JetBrains will work as well as NeoVim as well. Also, if you go to the Copilot main page, it will tell you the supported IDs and their specific versions as well, if you're at all concerned about that.
Yep. Interestingly enough, I saw somebody testing GitHub Copilot with Emacs, believe it or not. So that was
Why not?
It was brought up kind of in jest in a customer call, but they were actually like, "Oh, here's the telemetry. Here's the people who are trying." But as far as official support, I think what we're looking
I've actually
at
used it for even things like Markdown. I've been creating documentation. It does great with that. It understands if you go down the contextual route and have other Markdown files open, it kind of understands what you're trying to get at and tries to give you the suggestions from there. I've even seen some folks demonstrate making up their own language as they go. Have a simple set of text files that are open that kind of define their own language, and then Copilot just starts suggesting based upon that input.
Cool. Yeah, one of the other really common gripe ones that I run across is people want to see it make YAML because they hate writing YAML. But
yep, and guess what? It'll write YAML.
So there are a couple of additional questions that had popped in. I think we have time for maybe both, but at least one. If we need to reverse engineer large amounts of code to generate documentation or requirements, does Copilot have that capability?
Great question. And some of that was shown a little bit at Build with Copilot Chat coming out to help you generate some documentation. And in the WinWire session as well, Vinny showed that in one of his demos, how you can feed it not only just a specific file and let it generate documentation for you, but he also indicated you could point at an entire repository and let it generate that documentation for you as well. So maybe in Copilot as it exists today, the points and clicks may not be there. Certainly the intelligence is there. And so it's a matter of just lighting that up.
Excellent. Another one, for suggesting the code snippets, can Copilot adapt to the team's coding standards and patterns in the Visual Studio solution files, or is that possible only by opening the code files as a hint, as shown in the demo?
Great question. It certainly works best by having the files open as a hint so it can learn from the code itself what those patterns might be. But I can check and see if there's any additional intelligence to have it actually look through the files, because it will not actually be searching your files, because you don't want Copilot searching through your unopened code in case you inadvertently find some things. Some people don't organize their code file structure very well, so it's interspersed with personal documents and other things like that. So you certainly don't want it to kind of scanning your folder structure, looking for that additional context. But that does sound like a really interesting use case, though.
Yeah, and then I'm going to cut it at this last question here. Can Copilot generate unit test cases for different scenarios?
Great question. And you saw a small preview of that. I did one for a JavaScript file. I think it's one of the last demos that I did. And that is something that is in Copilot Chat. In the demo on stage during build, the person providing the demo actually opens up some code and asks the chat to go ahead and create from some test case, or excuse me, unit tests, and it created a bunch of unit tests for you.
Excellent. Well, appreciate it. Thanks so much, Steve, for both the presentation as well as some live demonstration to go about with that. Looks like there are a couple other questions coming in. We'll be able to monitor chat and respond to some of those as we go.
Absolutely.
And with that, we have drawn to our final break